Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stress Free IEP, the show where we help families build their village so they can raise their neurodivergent children with confidence and clarity and support. I'm your host, Frances Schefter, special education attorney, advocate, and fellow parent walking this journey with you. Each week, we shine a light on the professionals, services, and real world strategies that support your child both inside and outside the classroom. From navigating the IEP process to finding the right providers in your community, we're here to help you connect the dots and feel empowered every step of the day. Whether you're joining us live on Facebook or YouTube or listening later on your favorite podcast app, we are so glad you're here. Let's dive in and meet today's great guest. Dr. Maggie Kang is a Yale-trained physician and certified resilience and healthcare coach who empowers parents to transform the journey of their child's diagnosis into opportunities for growth, resilience, and purpose. After navigating her own daughter's rare disease, Maggie also uses her expertise to guide parents through the healthcare system, helping them turn health challenges into leadership. Maggie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here because, the medical world and on where we are with stress and all that, having that medical input to help parents deal with the stress, because as we know, raising a neurodivergent child is stressful.
It is. I mean, I think at the time that your child gets any diagnosis, and specifically in my case, my daughter was diagnosed with a rare disease at age 9, and that very much upended our lives. And I think that that's a very similar experience for a lot of parents who have a child who they think is healthy and they have sort of a vision of what that life is going to look like. And then you get a diagnosis and you find your child is different in some way. And so you're going to be facing challenges and having to navigate systems that you were not perhaps prepared to do.
Right. And that's part of the reason I have this show is to help parents like, hey, look, there's this and there's this, because I've heard so many times from, potential clients, parents, other parents, like, I didn't know that existed.
That is so true. Yes. That's, I think, in the space that you and I actually met when we were at sort of a networking event supporting, students with learning differences. And so we were both thinking, I have never met someone who does the work that you do. And that was really exciting that this is available. And I do know that when, at least from sort of a medical diagnosis, which in my mind, like sort of more broadly speaking, it's probably not that different, whether, you get a child with a learning difference that you were not prepared to handle, or a medical diagnosis that you were not prepared to handle. And so I do love that there are support systems available. So for me, I felt like when my daughter was diagnosed, and although I'm a physician, it was still very challenging learning on the patient family side how to navigate our healthcare system, and then, or systems in general, and then in turn, how to navigate the transition to school. Because my daughter was actually in the hospital for quite some time, and she came out of the hospital completely different. She had lost 20 pounds in her 9-year-old frame. You can imagine what that difference could have been. She was previously a robust athlete, very strong, never got sick, and now in a wheelchair actually at the time of discharge, and somebody who could not actually speak or eat solid foods because she had a basically a rare autoimmune inflammatory disease that can impact the optic nerves, the brain, and spinal cord. For us, it impacted her brain globally, inflammatory changes sort of in multiple areas. And so that sort of translated into challenges upon discharge, and transitioning back to life as perhaps she once knew it was completely different.
Right. And it is hard. Like I've done presentations to a lot of medical professionals about how to take the medical and put that into the school. Like, what do we need? What supports do you need? And being new to it, like all of a sudden, you now have a child in a wheelchair and with other medical needs and stuff. And what do we do? What do we ask the school? Where do we start the process?
It's so hard to know. Yeah. And I guess in most situations you start with your doctor, right? But then what if there's a disconnect between the communication of the doctor and the school, which happens often, more
Yes.
often than we would like, I guess. And so, and just to be clear, my daughter actually did get better in terms of not being in a wheelchair. She actually is able to eat solid foods. And, it did take a couple of years for her to get back to things, but for the most part, she looks like a normal kid on the outside. And that too presents challenges in and of itself to have sort of these like indivisible disabilities, as people say. So people don't maybe believe you have this chronic underlying condition, that you have these challenges that may not be visible day to day.
Right, and those are the challenges we have in the school system often, the invisible disabilities or, "Well, it's temporary, we don't really need to put something in place. We can
Yes,
just, do best teaching practices,"
it is
and
true.
all that stuff. Yeah, and then it's like, if it's not in writing, on the lawyer side, if it's not in writing, it's not gonna happen, period.
Right. And also, I think from
Yeah,
the rare disease perspective, if it's not a diagnosis people are familiar with, there's also that feeling of, well, is that real? What does that actually mean? And that type of thing.
right, and that's when the parent has to come in and educate the school system often.
Yes. Oh, yes. And it's unfortunate that that sort of burden, if you will, is incumbent upon us, because now we're left sort of navigating not only the medical aspects and sort of the general well-being of our child, but now we have to convince people that we actually have these challenges, and how to better support my child in that scenario. So it's a lot, and I can see how that could be very overwhelming.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, and stressful, and it just like, I know what like, so on the medical side, I'm just thinking about, like, what pointers you have for parents of, like, what can they do? Because it's emotional, we know that, right? As parents of neurodivergent, we know it's emotional. What
Yeah.
can they do to help survive this and to be able to kind of stay in the advocating for their child instead of the emotion stressful point?
Right. And actually I kind of, my work lives at that intersection of sort of medicine, human emotion, and systems. And I think sort of like more broadly speaking, it is about sort of mental management, like our mindset. And then that is not to say that it's, again, look, it seems that I'm once again putting it upon us as parents or moms when we are navigating systems, but it is in so many ways where it starts, because I think that, again, sort of more broadly, and I'll get into like a little bit more tangibles on what to do, is that I think that when we think about, if you're not medical and if you're not in sort of the school system and you don't know what you're up against, you think that these are these very sort of daunting, intimidating institutions that you will not be able to somehow connect to and convince them, and you're just going to have to sort of take whatever they give you. And that is very much sort of a feeling of powerlessness, and if not, sort of a victim mentality, if you will. And I was definitely there. I was given this diagnosis, this life was suddenly given to us, and what we knew was gone, and I just didn't feel like, I just kind of woke up to this one day and I felt like I had to figure out a way to adjust. Now, yes, it is very helpful that I am also a physician, but I will tell you that still it was challenging. So that is all to say that I had to sort of change sort of the way I was looking at it. Instead of asking myself questions like, "Oh my gosh, why is this happening to us? This is so terrible." And like, what did I do to deserve this? Like, why is it my kid? And what's happening? And why am I such a bad mom? Because all those kinds of questions are sort of like these dead end questions that I like to think of. Like, it doesn't lead your mind to open up to find solutions. And to think about, the whole medical system and schools. And also I want to throw in their insurance companies, because there's a lot of parallel here.
Yes.
It is sort of like this feeling of you versus institution. But if you want to dismantle that way of thinking, you can start by asking yourself other questions like, this is the endpoint I want to see for my kid. And let's talk specifically about schools. I see that my daughter has these challenges. The school does not know what these challenges are. They don't understand her disease. So, how can I get them on board? How can I help ask my doctor to help us to get them on board? So, like, asking yourself a question like that with a very clear goal in mind, I feel like already shifts my feeling, my personal energy into thinking, I'm going to make this work. And, through the process of it, I will say one of the side benefits is that you actually become stronger. You become a better advocate for not only yourself, your family, but you teach your child how to do the same. So there is so much in the way of like modeling and really sort of up leveling a situation that feels terrible to one that actually works. Now, I think that more specifically, I wanted to draw a parallel between, school accommodations and insurance, because in many ways they're very similar in how I sort of support parents as they navigate both systems. So, with health insurance, that is a beast that is in some
Mhm.
ways, okay, it's hard, okay? And so
Yeah.
one of the ways, I've come across this challenge in both scenarios where I call an insurance company and then they ask me, well, who did you talk to? When did you find that information out? Because I'll be like, oh, this is like my 10th call and I can't get this. This is my third denial. What is happening? And they'll say, well, we don't know that you called. Who told you that? Why did you not submit this? And I have no recollection of who I spoke to or when. So I have now started to create a Google Doc that just is one document that has a
Mhm.
date that I say I called this number, this insurance company, I talked to this person, they said this. And then I ask these questions. And after a phone call, I always leave learning something. And I'll ask a question like, well, what do I need to get this approved? Or like, what in the past has helped other families get this approved? Why did we get this denied? And they'll sometimes be helpful, and everyone says something completely different. That's the crazy
Oh,
thing.
yep.
Get the name, and then you write that down. And then the next time you open the doc, you could follow all of like when you saw the people. And I'm not very tech savvy. So to me, this works. If you have some app that does this better, that's awesome. I found that translating that same sort of skill set or organized systems approach to schools was also helpful, because I was a complete sort of basket case after my daughter was, suddenly in the ICU for many weeks and trying to transition her out of the hospital and then eventually to school, which didn't happen for several months. I thought for some reason she'd just go to school and the school would just do exactly what I told them to, because
Yep.
I've suffered, my kid has suffered, and they should care about her, right? But that turned out to be not the case. And it happened like to be also the case that the school had switched head of the principal of the lower school
Oh,
changed, and there was a completely new admin. They didn't know us. They didn't even know what was going on with my daughter. So there was a lot of, well, this person said this, and we could start this, and or we could come to school part-time, or that she would have an opportunity to rest at times. And then they looked at me as if like I'm making it up, or we don't do things that way anymore. Who did you talk to? When did you get that in writing? All of that. And I was so taken aback. So what I ended up doing again was like I sort of created my note system and I tried to get as much information as I could. What do you need from us to help you to support my child?
yeah.
What sort of, I guess, accommodations are even available? So then they told me, this is also interesting, is that there was actually a neuropsychologist on our neuroimmunology team, but I didn't even know that that person was going to be a part of our care until after, like way after she was discharged. So when that happened, I realized, oh, so there's actually a person here that's going to help with this process. So we had to do an official evaluation, which was apparently part of the normal protocol after discharge, which I was not aware of, but that was helpful. And so we thankfully didn't have to wait, years or however long people need to wait
Yep.
to get a neuropsychological exam. And thankfully ours was actually covered on our insurance policy because it was done sort of with our neuroimmunology team. So those two sort of challenges were not ones that we had to face, but those are two very real challenges that many
Mhm.
families do. So we brought our neuropsychologist on board, the pediatrician on board. They wrote letters. They had to add things to the letters. And that
Mhm.
only after I communicated with the school team, tell me exactly what you need me to do. And it was after sort of like a couple back and forths and getting everyone on the same page, and then emailing them everything that I understood after that conversation and the documents that I will support, give to support them. And then we're done, right? Not
Yep,
really.
yep.
And then it changes also if you go from like lower school to middle school to upper school.
Mhm.
So there was a lot that I didn't know was coming. So in many ways, it's a lot of like mental preparation and getting in the mindset of this is a marathon, not a sprint, and to accept pushback. I mean, to expect pushback,
Right.
expect the denials from the insurance company. Do not let it derail your day because it used to for me. You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
what do you mean? You deny her MRI, like she needs this. What do you mean you're denying her and this medication that she needs? To me, every time I got that denial, I just kind of lost it. And when you allow your sort of frustration and anger to take over in such a way, it really sort of depletes you. It doesn't strengthen you. So I
Yeah.
do feel like the mindset piece is very empowering. And the way I support people is to teach them that and also to expect things to occur, but then to know that there are ways to move past it.
Right. But I think, but feeling the feelings, right? Like be frustrated, be mad, be angry, but then suck it up and move on, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm so glad you said that. I mean, you have to feel the feels, but in some ways, like if you kind of, I don't even know what the word is, to allow yourself to go there every time
Mm,
something happens and you're not able to kind of achieve the things that you want, it
right,
can sort of compound the problem. And so absolutely there are times when you need to feel the feels. And then there are times when you need to get your kid support. And then there are times when you need to figure out a way to manage your mind in order that you're supporting yourself in a sustainable way long term.
right. I used to say, like, okay, I can be angry and ticked off and feeling all my feels for an hour, and then I'm gonna get myself together, like give myself that hour, and then, all right, we're done. Now let's figure out what to do next, right?
Yes, yes. And because part of like resilience and sustainability in the long term is the ability to manage your feelings, right? And so I guess managing is different than just sort of letting yourself go and get derailed and then getting yourself into that like sort of mental space of powerlessness. Like that's not the place where you want to be. You want to feel the feels because they're your feelings. And in doing so, you are actually supporting yourself. But I guess that there is sort of a distinction, and I guess maybe
Yeah.
but that's like a completely different topic. But yeah,
Right.
is that.
Yeah, but it's true. I mean, like, there's so many different things that you could, do, and it's like again, it's overwhelming for the parents. Like, well, this parent, somebody's telling me to do this, and somebody's telling me to do that, and
Right,
finding that right thing. It's still frustrating because, as you were saying, like you trust the school, you want them to do what's best for your child.
right.
Um, I'm impressed that you had a school actually tell you what you needed to do to get what you wanted. That
Yes,
doesn't always happen.
yes, I know that. That does not
Yeah,
always happen. And I guess because our situation was like a little bit unique in
yeah,
that we had this rare disease that the school knew almost killed my kid. So
yeah,
that to them was probably in their mind flagged as a lot more of a liability fear
yep,
than, maybe other sort of diagnoses that are presented to them. But that was helpful in that they were maybe a little bit more concerned in the way that they didn't understand our situation. So having them sort of get on board with us was not as challenging as I think some other families who've been on a similar journey.
right. And getting the medical team on board to help.
Yes, yes, but, at times that is even sometimes not enough. It's always
Right. Well,
mind-boggling to me.
yes, because the medical team is doing the medical side, and schools love to say, "Well, it's a medical problem, not a school
Yes,
problem. You need to deal with it on the medical side."
yes, but
And
in
it's that
fact,
can
it's
yeah.
both. It's usually both. I mean, if you think about the number of hours your child is in school, I
Mhm.
mean, they play a huge role in your child's life. So it's really important to get everyone on the same page. But, it's interesting. Here's an example, I'll tell you. There was a family that I was working with, and their child actually has the same disease as my daughter's. And so when they were transitioning to college, and this is a huge area of conversation for a lot of parents of kids with either rare or chronic diseases. I mean, what does that look like when your child has to sort of transition to adulthood, is going to college, living away from home? I mean, that could be potentially scary as to what could happen to your child if they don't take care of themselves. So, this mom whose daughter also has a similar autoimmune condition, which means, by the way, when you're on medications, it makes you basically immunocompromised. And
Yeah.
so, in order to sort of reduce the inflammatory response, you have to reduce your body's ability to, I guess, launch
Mhm.
that immunologic response. So she and I and many people in our community are very concerned about the health of our child if they're living, let's say, in a space where there's like a lot of kids and somebody gets sick, and there's always that fear of that, meningitis or whatever have you in
Yeah.
college. So when she was asking for accommodations, the school completely denied it for her child, which really surprised her. It surprised me. And so, even though it was written in the medical notes and all of that, and what we realized was that, and this is actually something I work with families on too, is that when you're trying to bridge this gap between medicine and school institutions, it's a lot of the language that is not understood. And so
Right.
I find like people, like lay people who aren't familiar with, especially a rare disease diagnosis, they have sort of buckets in their mind of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate for accommodations. And when they hear something like an autoimmune disease, oh, well, that's nothing. Like, I have a thyroid condition. Your kid's going to be fine. But it's not anywhere near the same thing. The disease that, our kids have is extremely aggressive. And so I feel like the buzzword, this is after a couple back and forths that I think that they needed to hear, was that the medication she was on, which is a biologic that requires an infusion, was basically a kind of chemotherapeutic agent, which in fact it was. That was the original purpose of its creation, and it's used in off-label therapy in her child. So as soon as that word was shared, that person was like, oh, well, if she's on chemo, well, of course she gets accommodations. Like, we're going to
Yeah.
give her own bathroom and her own
Right.
time. I mean, it was just like a complete 180. So what I learned from that was that sometimes you really need to speak in the language that they understand. And
Right.
maybe, I mean, I think cancer is understandable to people, chemo is understandable to people,
Mhm.
and maybe a lot of things related to COVID, possibly, and even like a POTS diagnosis has become much more mainstream in dialogue. So those sort of situations seem to be more acceptable. The rare diagnoses, I think, need more education. And
Yeah.
I think schools are slowly sort of coming on board with that, but still, and unfortunately, it's sort of incumbent upon us as the mom advocates to do that, and in turn, the student advocate when they come of age.
Right, and linking it to it's similar to this, or
Yeah,
they need this accommodation because without this accommodation, this is what happens,
exactly,
and,
exactly.
like spoon feeding the school,
I think
what they
it's
did, right?
sometimes necessary. I think they just don't know that
Yeah.
particular disease, and sometimes they need to know.
Right, and that's the thing, like, schools don't know, they're in the disability office, they're in the ADA office, they don't know everything that's out there, they just have their if this, then this, if this, then this, and
Right,
so,
and
well, they don't have any of these on the checklist, so it must be a no.
right, exactly. So I guess, I mean, very specifically then, it's maybe good to find out what is on their checklist and
Right.
see how we can sort of fit this into their, checklist to make this work for them.
Right, right, which is what I do, like, I mean, I've done the presentation for psychologists, speech pathologists and stuff, it's just, like, simple language that doctors use, just a
Yes.
simple tweak makes it, like, the
Oh,
child has a hard fine motor skills, like, okay, tweak that a little to say which makes it difficult for them to copy things from the board,
yeah.
to, write things, and then that puts it, "Oh, the teachers now understand what that means in the classroom and how
Yes.
to support."
Yes, I think sometimes you do have to very explicitly describe how that might look to them in their classroom, on campus, in the dorm, everything. And so maybe we don't like think to the extent that we have to be explicit, but I've learned that it is advantageous to do that.
Right, exactly. It's like, give them more, you
Yeah.
can never have too much, right? Like,
Right, right. Actually, it's so funny that you say that because after we had some pushback from our school, our pediatrician, our pediatric neurologist wrote this very extensive letter. And when I read it, it was scary. I was
right,
like, basically, you're telling the school that my kid could die any moment, really. And she said,
yeah,
yes, she goes, don't let that scare you. That would be in the most extreme scenario. This is just the type of information and the way and the language that a school needs to hear to support in XYZ manner. So I was like, wow, okay, strong language, but okay, if that is what we need to do.
And it worked.
It
Yeah.
did, it did, and
Right.
I think that after a time when they were familiar with how she managed herself, and incidentally, she's an extremely strong advocate, self-advocate at school, and so this was, I think, the key piece, and this is another aspect of what I do with parents too. I mean, moms more often than dads, but there is a way of sort of modeling the behavior and involving your child in the advocacy work that you're doing for them so that they learn
Mhm.
how to do it, because by and large, the number of hours that they're in school without you.
Yep.
So, I mean, could you imagine the exhaustion of when your kid comes back from school, tells you what happened, then you have to call the school or set up an
Mhm.
appointment, and it goes just like on and on. Moms do this often, and I don't
Yeah.
know how it's sustainable for them because some moms are calling the school every week.
Yep. And, I so at 14 is when kids get invited to the IEP meeting. My daughter started going to hers, I think I wanna say 4th grade. She
Oh,
doesn't come for the whole meeting, but she comes to say, "Hey, this is what I need when," or "This is what works for me, this is what doesn't work for me." And she just advocates for herself so that
yeah.
it's so empowering for her,
Yeah.
and it's so helpful for the school because they're hearing it directly from her.
Yes, and that and even I think the school at one point asked me, "Do we need to contact you every time we have a question, or can we talk to her?" And I said, "You can definitely talk to her. If she thinks that she's not able to answer it, she will tell you, and then you feel free to call me anytime you want." And another thing I've noticed also is that with some schools, they are maybe resistant because they perhaps think a mom is being overbearing or we're like
Mhm.
coddling our child, and so so the school, I think, sort of is resistant in that way. And I think when you involve the child and the child becomes their own advocate, it changes the dynamic of it, where I'm not sort of, in an adversarial relationship with school.
Mhm.
We're forming a partnership and our child is actually doing the advocating. I think that is the scenario and sort of the dynamic that the school would prefer. So, to the extent that your child can handle that and be their advocate, I think would be really helpful, not only now, but in the long term for both them and yourself.
Right. And it's like, they don't even have to come in for the entire meeting, just to come in for a little bit. The
Oh,
first time Hannah came in, she was hiding behind me. She knew everybody in the room, but there were 5 adults in the room, so it was a little overwhelming. But
yeah.
then, once, one person would talk to her and ask a question, she was able to respond, and then she got comfortable. And so now, as she's gotten older, she's in 6th grade now, like, she can come into an IEP meeting, I don't care how many adults are sitting there, I'm good, and, you know?
Amazing, and so that's
Yeah.
also another amazing aspect of the
Mhm.
experience. I mean, I feel like there is such like a tendency to think, "Oh, my kid is different, has his challenges, it's kind of not great and whatever." But there are some things that come out of that situation, like a silver lining, if you will,
Mhm.
that really can be uplifting to see your child
Yeah.
grow in that way, to understand that, yes, they're different, but there are ways that they can sort of overcome it or to like use it or leverage it to become a really good speaker, an advocate, and communicator.
Yeah, yeah, and it's awesome. I love watching it because it's just, I sit back and I'm like, "Yep, that's my kid." You know?
I know it is
Right.
such a wonderful feeling to see
It
your
is.
child
Yeah,
grow in that way. Yeah.
right, and now mind you, there are plenty times of, "Ugh, that's my kid," you know?
Right, 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 right. Yeah, I mean, they're kids, right, at the end of the day. I mean,
Right, exactly, but finding that balance, that's part of parenting, like, helping them come from, a place where it's not helpful to the place where it is helpful.
yes. I mean, I feel like in this situation where, it does often feel like we're bumping up against a lot of frustration. But at the same time, if you think about it, this is problem solving at its best,
Yeah.
right? And you're doing it with your child and you're showing them the power of that communication, which, if you hear on, on everything that you read now with AI and the future of kids, like, what is it going to look like? What are the skills that you need? Everyone always comes out with communication and leadership. And advocacy. And those are all skills that these kids are going to have in spades after all of
Right.
this.
Yep, exactly, 100%. So I wanna turn a little bit to, like, 'cause I know you support parents,
Yeah,
and what are some techniques or tips you have for parents in this to be able to keep themselves, I don't wanna say how to survive, to thrive, to be able to truly advocate for their children?
right. I think that so a couple approaches. One, I've already spoke to, and this is maybe the most important, and it is at the end of the day sort of the crux of coaching, because mental management is everything. It is the reality you create for yourself. It defines how you feel in the morning. It defines kind of what you're able to achieve in your day and your ability and your belief in your ability to do that. That at the end of the day, to me, is everything. So, one of the tools that is powerful, because a lot of times we're all very much alone in our head thinking about this problem, is how do you talk to yourself and what are the questions
Mm,
that you ask yourself? Not, why am I such a lame mom that I can't
right.
do this for my kid, right? You ask, this is what I want to achieve today. Like sometimes I have the whole morning set out to call the insurance company or to like call the school or to do research on something, be like, this is what I want to achieve today. What is the best way that I can do it? And then all of a sudden, my mind is opening up to people, to ideas of, oh, I'm going to reach out to this mom because I know they did the same thing. Or I'm going to just write out my script of what I'm going to say to the teacher when they call, because I know that this incident happened and this is going to maybe snowball into something more than I want, but I'm mentally prepared. And somehow doing that day to day for me has gotten me to a different place, like a different mindset where I'm able to feel powerful versus powerless. That's a very, very different experience and reality that I can create for myself. It
Right.
is sometimes, hard to do that on your own. And so, I mean, you can either hire a coach or
Right.
you can maybe, I guess, journal. Or I think if you find another person who is in a similar situation and talk through what has been successful and what has not, that has been extremely helpful. It's, I guess, this idea of like finding your community, finding your
Yeah,
people. And what
yeah,
was really wonderful about our school is that there was an affinity group that was created for kids, with sort of these chronic invisible disabilities. And that was extraordinarily empowering for not only the students, but also the parents.
right.
So I think it all comes down to mindset, really.
Right.
Is
Get
it-
away from the get away from the why and like what and how. What do I want? How do I get there?
Yeah. How do I support myself in doing this? How can I support my kid? How can I be the mom that I want to be for my kid? That
Mm,
those are all questions that open your mind, not sort of close it to sort of, because the closing questions lead you to despair. Questions like this open you up to feeling empowered and also some really wonderful possibilities, like I said before, like seeing your child grow in their self-advocacy and understanding how to flex their own sort of advocacy muscles, I think is one of the most rewarding things as a parent to see.
yeah, definitely. And one of the things I was just thinking about, like at IEP meetings and stuff for parents, I tell my clients all the time, if you get overwhelmed or you need to stop the meeting.
Yeah,
Tell them you need a minute, like, and if you need to reschedule it, tell them to reschedule.
100%.
If you like to use the term tap out, like if you get to that emotional point that you can't anymore, that you're that triggered, like take a step back. That's okay.
Yeah, it is. And you know what else is interesting is also going back to this idea of like this thinking of me against the institution is also maybe not helpful because again, it seems like it's a daunting task to have to go up against an institution to have them give you what you need. Maybe think of them all as individual moms, which a lot of them are,
Yeah.
or dads. A lot of
Mhm.
people who are school admin have kids of their own. And as we know, even if your child is neurotypical and doesn't have a chronic condition, every child struggles in their own way. And every parent has that sort of emotional soft space, if you will. And so
Yep.
healing to that can be very powerful in creating a partnership that works.
Right. Exactly. I have a client, I know I've said this before, that she brings a picture of her son and puts it up at all the IEP meetings because, like, this is who we're talking about. We're not talking about some child. We're not talking about all the students. This is who we're talking about.
Yes, yeah, it's so true. It's like kind of humanizing the process.
Yep.
Yes, there's bureaucracy and red tape and liability, perhaps, or a lot of paperwork, but at the end of the day, we are all humans and we're all here to try and support the students at the school, right? So
Right.
let's see how we can make this work. And once you ask that question of how, it sort of opens people up. It's like people aren't on the defense. Like, are you going to try and force me into doing this thing? And I don't understand why your kid needs this thing. Look at that kid. That kid's totally struggling. Your kid's not. And there is all of that. So I think just kind of getting everyone sort of on the same page. It's like you read a lot of those books on negotiation. It's all the same idea. Is
Yeah.
it's like at the end of the day, we're not really that opposing of what we're trying to achieve. We're not so much in opposition. We are actually sort of in a partnership, and let's sort of remind everyone about that and move forward from that space.
Right. Exactly. And the space of focusing on the child and what the child needs,
Well,
like,
yes, yes.
yeah. And that, like, how can we do it? What can we do
Yeah,
as a team? And I always try to do that when I go to IEP meetings because people are always like, well, doesn't it adversarial once you bring an attorney? I'm like, no, it doesn't always have to be. Come from the place of, we're just trying to support my child. I'm not blaming you for not doing something. I'm not blaming you, for this, but this is where we are. This is what I'm seeing. What
right.
can we do differently?
Right, right. And also, I think from a legal perspective, maybe people aren't aware of the laws.
Yeah.
And so clarification on that can have people come on board in a different way. So I
Yes.
think
Exactly.
you gotta get all the information there that people need to hear to
Yep.
support your child.
100%. This has been, oh my God, Maggie, I'm so glad. I'm so glad we met and that we talked about it. And I was like, it's so funny because sometimes I'm like, well, I don't know, how would they fit into the show? And, we talked about it and perfectly you fit in of, hey, these are the realities. We need to take care of ourselves. And I love that one little, that one thing of just get out of that why and get into what do I want and how do I get there,
Yes.
is so helpful.
Yeah, I think that is, if you take just one nugget away from this, and that is actually applicable to really everything.
100%. I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all of your wisdom with our listeners.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed this conversation. I do hope this was helpful to your audience. And I know that it's really hard out there for parents.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
more now than other times. I don't know. It's maybe always challenging if your child gets diagnosed with something that's, different. It just opens up and a new sort of, I guess, way of, I guess you have to like learn how to adapt and become the parent that you need to be to support your child. It's like response to
Exactly.
whatever happens in the disruptions of life.
Yep. Exactly. And then once you figure it out, they're going to throw something else at you.
Well, I mean, that's what happens. I mean,
Yep. That's life.
yeah, I talked about that in my TEDx talk about how one sort of can respond to these disruptions using the story of my daughter's diagnosis. And so that is
We're going to have to, we'll get the link to your TEDx talk and make sure we put it in the show notes. Also, I forgot you had one.
yeah, I think
Wonderful.
it's I think a bit of wisdom that I learned in this journey that I like to share with others. I think it greatly helps us from a mental perspective.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Stress Free IEP. We hope today's conversation gave you new tools, insights, or just a little more peace of mind as you support your neurodivergent child. Next week, we'll have episode 141, Sean McCormick, on executive functioning skills for IEP success. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone in your village. You can always learn more and connect with me at schefterlaw.com or follow along on social media. Until next time, remember, you do not have to do it all alone.